I think everyone can hear me. Yeah. Great. Great, so it's past 6 p.m, so we'll get started. Hello and welcome everyone to a very special and different session from what we usually had at the conference. So we've done this in partnership with the Faculty of Public Health and the TIFF podcast. So my name is Kazim Beebeejaun and I'm a new consultant epidemiologist at UKHSA and one of the hosts of the Training in Public Health podcast, or TIFF for short. So the podcast has been running for over 10 years now, and essentially aims to provide a wide panoramic of what it means to work in public health. So it's about capturing the stories, the reflections, the lessons learned that you can't read about in a textbook. The stories of incredible work, incredible leadership, and that critical reflection on how we can navigate public health, be better managers, better leaders across an increasingly complex public health system. So, for example, you can see in the slide here, we recently interviewed Professor Jonathan Van Tam on his reflections on pandemic preparedness and how we can become better communicators during public health crisis. We also interviewed Dr. Chikwe Ihekwezu from WHO on global health leadership during crisis, and Professor Martin McKee on the skills needed to navigate the interface between politics and public health. So these are some of the themes that we're going to discuss in this session, and I don't think it really could have come at a better time to sort of set the scene. You know, the last 10 years have really tested the public health workforce, and arguably the world has become more complex and more uncertain than ever. You know, we're going through currently some major changes to our healthcare system and the civil service, and across the world, governments are cutting back on public health, and arguably global solidarity has declined. So this, begs the question: how do we manage this as a public health profession? What have we learnt from our experiences with chaos and uncertainty in the past? What skills do we need as a profession? And how do we look after our staff during these times of uncertainty and chaos? Do we need an alternative paradigm of leadership? And how do we work better within and across organizations to address the challenges ahead, whether it's climate change, inequalities, or emerging infectious diseases? How can we better equip the current and next generation of leaders in this room right now and those listening online to lead on the challenges ahead? So we'd like to make this as interactive as possible. We're live streaming on the intranet page, and think of your questions, and we'll have time at the end of the session to have a Q&A with our panel. So to get started, I will hand over to my co-host, Fatai, to introduce himself and the panelists.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. So I am Fatai Ogunlayi, and I'm a consultant in public health in a London borough, as well as having an honorary role with UK Health Security Agency. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you today, and our panelist needs no introduction, but I think it's only fair that we still give some brief introduction to our panelists. I will start from that end in terms of introduction, Yvonne, if you don't mind. So our first panelist is Professor Yvonne Doyle. Many of us know Yvonne. She has over 40 years of experience as a public health doctor who has worked in several senior roles, including as the first medical director for Public Health England at NHS England, and a leadership role in England during the COVID-19 pandemic. Yvonne, I understand you're currently a senior advisor in terms of to the WHO Europe on aging in good health, and Yvonne has a number of non-executive roles and chairs the Health Service Committee for the Faculty of Public Health. And a very warm welcome to you, Yvonne. Welcome. And our next panelist is Dr. Meera Chand. Meera, who you might have seen in a number of incident management for UKHSA, leads the UKHSA National Specialist Clinical and Public Health Function for emerging respiratory and high-threat infections. I'm just checking, making sure I get all of this right. She has over 2 decades of experience in incident response and has been incident lead for a range of high-threat outbreaks, including Mpox, COVID-19, Lassa fever. You think it's probably Meera at the forefront of it. Meera is also the clinical lead for UKHSA-wide pathogen genomics program. A very warm welcome to you as well, Meera. And our final panelist, and certainly not the least, is Professor Kevin Fenton. Kevin is the president of the Faculty of Public Health and the regional director for London in the Office for Health Improvement and Disparity under the DHSC umbrella, for those who know the system. As a regional director, Kevin is the statutory public health advisor to the Mayor of London and the Greater London Authority. And as the president of the faculty, Kevin works closely with a wide range of partners who have interest in the public health agenda. And a very, very warm welcome to you as well, Kevin. Thank you. And I'm hoping our colleagues in the room and online can see that actually from the quality of the guests and the panelists we have, there will be some really interesting discussions. So please do pop those questions in terms of Q&A that we can come to later on. But I wonder if I may start with you, Kevin, because as Kazim said in this intro, that this session is about capturing stories, capturing reflections, capturing lessons learned. And the thing that comes to my mind, Kevin, is the work that the faculty did recently under your leadership in terms of the public health campaign, in terms of what is public health. Something that you said during that campaign that sort of stuck with me for a while is this notion that public health is a shared responsibility where there is a need for collective action, i.e. public health doesn't exist in a vacuum. We need to work together. And our public health leaders need to work across organizations, across departments, with our communities in bringing this to life. So I wonder if I may invite you, Kevin, to share key moments in your career to date where you've had to influence change across organizational boundaries and how that's shaped who you are today as a system leader.
Great. Well, thanks, Fatai, and thank you for hosting us today and to create the space for us to have this conversation as leaders and to reflect as leaders. You know, when I think of my own career, there's so few things that I've done that I haven't done in partnership with colleagues working across disciplines, across organizations, and vertical integration from national, regional, local to the community. So my public health practice is built on working within systems and across systems. I'm privileged to be the government's chief advisor on HIV, and I've been leading the implementation of the National HIV Action Plan that requires us to work across organizations and again vertically integrating from national to community organizations the work on ending HIV transmission in England. In London, a number of the projects that we run, whether it is tackling child obesity, working on air pollution and air quality in the city. We've started a new initiative in London called the Million Hearts and Minds campaign, which is a pan-London, pan-regional intervention on heart health, really looking at how we work across partners on a single vision, which is to improve outcomes for cardiovascular disease, but leveraging the assets and building on the lessons from COVID on clinical pathways, working with businesses and the private sector, engaging deep community mobilization around heart health, straight through to the work that we do on campaigns as well. So those are just three examples of where we use systems leadership and the principles of systems leadership to effect change, and change which is lasting and impactful as well.
Thank you, Kevin. And perhaps I may just follow up on that last point around lasting change. In your conversation earlier on with Andy Burnham, he talked about the importance of good housing in sustainable health agenda. And I just wonder, in that lasting change, how do you balance the pressure between the need for an immediate results versus that long-lasting change that we know is the right thing to do? How do you balance that pressure to deliver now versus that?
You know, that's a great question, because oftentimes, and I fight against this so much, we get trapped as public health leaders in the narrative of public health only has benefits in the long term. And we have to be really, really careful about that narrative. Why? because the current system is geared towards short-term investment and impact, return on investment within the foreseeable future, if not in the current financial year, but also demonstrating impact in order to sustain and argue for the sustainability of your funding. So the moment you begin to say you're doing public health work that won't pay off for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, you've already lost the argument. So what we need to do, Fatai, is to ensure we have our sights on both things simultaneously. Shift and work with our systems partners to achieve long-term sustainable change, but ensure that you have milestones and deliverables and outputs and outcomes in the short, medium, and long term, that you take the system along with you so they can see the journey and the benefits that you're accruing, and have the evidence, the data, and the economic measurements to begin to talk about the return on investment in the short, medium, and long term. So those are critical ways in which you both are true, but how you frame your interventions and frame your work so that it appeals to policymakers, to funders, to community, while driving for that long-term change is critical.
Yeah, it's really key, isn't it? Because I think I've fallen into that trap often as well, where you think public health as a long-term agenda, and whereas there are some immediate gain to be realized. Certainly in my local practice, my budget is set year on year, and so it needs to be delivered year on year, and it's a really good point. I think you wanted to come in on that point as well, Kazim.
It's just that point you made about that kind of duality between short-term and long-term impact. I wonder, Meera, if I could kind of bring you on that kind of short-term acute response. You know, in Fatai's intro, any incident at the moment, Meera is somewhere, you know, she's there leading in the heart of it. I wonder if you had any kind of brief reflections on the systems leadership skills needed in acute response. There was a previous session, I think it was Bassam, who said, you don't have time to exchange business cards during a pandemic, which I thought was a really great line. But what's your reflections on how to do systems leadership during an acute response, trying to bring the system together towards this common objective? You may not have had the time to build up those trusted relationships, but you're expected to bring everyone together towards that one objective.
Yeah, so I think you've set up two really good points there. One is about the trusted relationships. So as far as is possible, really good response relationships build on really good peacetime relationships. And if you don't put in that legwork and investment between times, then you will not be as successful when you're responding. So I think knowing that the system has to operate as one, even when it's not responding, is a really important piece. The second thing is this short-term and long-term balance. Now, I'm not talking in the same long-term as Kevin's talking when I'm doing an incident response, but it can feel like everything has to go really fast, everything, and that's not true. Only probably 2 or 3 or 4 things have to really go fast to change the impact of your response. And if you're not clear to the system what those things are, then everybody will put their energy into things that are not the things that will have the impact. And the bigger the system is, I find, the quicker that happens. So I think those things have a root sort of set of peacetime relationships that can support you, but also be super clear about what things are going to make the difference. Sometimes that's in the next few hours. That can be things we have to do tonight, as opposed to the things that we can do at a slower time, and make that clear across. I think those are the really key things. The other thing I would just briefly say in response is, if I think I'm communicating enough across the system, I probably need to do 25% more. That's been my learning all the time. So where you think is enough is generally not quite enough. Go a bit harder, make sure everybody is alongside you on what they know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you kind of mentioned about that speed in acute response, and obviously with speed there can be, you know, some chaos that ensues, you know, naturally during emerging infections and outbreaks. Yvonne, if I could kind of bring in your perspective on that kind of dynamic leadership required for incident response, and this is also something that we've come across, you know, interviewing people on the podcast, is around this theme of leadership during chaos and uncertainty. And, you know, for example, health protection leaders can be addressing an acute public health threat, whilst also the broader public health system around them ever changing. And this can have a real strain, as it is, you know, right now, arguably. And it suffices to say you're more than your fair share of kind of chaos in your career so far. I wonder what your kind of reflections are on any sort of particularly chaotic situations that you've been through, and what you think the current and next generation of leaders can learn from that.
Well, thank you, Kazim, and thank you, Fatai, for asking that. And it's really good to be here to see so many colleagues and friends, and I commend UKHSA and Jenny's leadership for having got to this point where I'm meeting very happy and content people who are proud of their work. So that's fantastic. And of course, we came out of chaos, didn't we? I'm just trying to think, how much chaos really can I give you tonight? But if I just sort of take the period from New Year's Eve 2019 to when it landed safely in October 2021, that was almost constant. It was tension interjected with chaos. That's the way that felt. And that was a very interesting thing in the context of health protection, because you usually think it's something fast and it'll be over and you've learned and you move on. But this wasn't the case. And I think a lot of our leadership is predicated in that kind of crisis situation. The training is about a pilot crashing a plane, how would you react, or something very chaotic that is over quickly, like a war situation or an extreme climate event, like a bad snow event with no water. This went on for a long time. So I thought, rather than tell everybody what they knew, because you've all lived through this, most of you, I just tell you the kind of the sentiments that crossed my mind and I lived through, and then the ups and downs of that, and then what it meant for leadership. So it started with worry on New Year's Eve. It moved into tension very quickly. It moved into sadness after that, because when death started occurring, you realized you couldn't save people, despite how much health hero you felt you were. It moved then into disbelief in the period of the attacks, because you will get, I'm just saying this because this is the way you'll have to deal with something, maybe not as bad as a pandemic, but some combination of this may happen. Disbelief, frustration then when everyone was jumping in and you weren't suddenly in charge anymore, you weren't the health hero, but nevertheless, there were a lot of kind of people trying to fix things. And you've got to manage your situation and your role in that. Betrayal, when you found that your organization had been disbanded in a Sunday newspaper. And then loneliness, because there was a long period after that where various of us didn't really have established roles because the organization no longer existed. So that's the kind of downside of the leadership ask. And the upside was loyalty, tremendous camaraderie, humor, also excellence and real endeavor. I think people, my teams, my colleagues really moved hard to try and save those lives and to deliver at the very top of their license. And enormous pride of that. And I think feeling privileged, despite the pain of it all, to have actually been able to work through it, because that would be once in 100 years. And however painful it was good to be there. And we just kept going together. That's how we got through it. And eventually, it's wonderful to see the kind of blossoming of an organization that is very badly needed by the country.
Yeah. I mean, hypothetical question. If you had a time machine and you could go back pre-COVID and say something to your previous self, is there anything you could have done to prepare for that situation?
I think, as Meera has said about relationships need to be in place before something hard happens. You need to know yourself well before you get into that kind of situation. I mean, hopefully we won't have to go through that extreme demand again for such a prolonged period. But if you did, I would say invest in your development and know yourself, know how deep you can dig, and know when to stop. Because that's another element of, being a good leader, is you aren't a health hero. You need good teams, and you do need partnerships, and you do need those skills to be able to bring others with you.
Thank you. It's really powerful point, isn't it, about knowing yourself and knowing when to stop. And I just wonder, because there's something I was really touched by the story that Professor Harris told earlier on about the great aunt and what it says in there and the importance of knowing yourself and knowing when to stop. And I just wonder, Meera, if I may come to you on this point, because we've talked about what it means to work in a system leadership, we've talked about what it means to try and operate in chaos, but we know the best of our leaders are doing all of this stuff while leading teams on a day-to-day basis. And I don't know about many people. I know certainly that for me, public health wasn't the place you come to because you want to get rich and famous. It's a vocation, of course. And what that looks like, and certainly what I've seen in teams that I now lead, is people putting in extra shift and going the extra mile. And I just wonder, on that point that Yvonne made about knowing when to stop, what's the role that we have as leaders in just watching out for burnout? What are strategies that we can put in place to prevent that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I'm afraid there might be a few people in the audience who have a wry smile if they've been working with me recently on incidents about that question. I think my overall reflection on that is that people are not the same in their tolerance, and we shouldn't really try to make that a uniform situation. I think it's important that people can recognize what the signs are when they are working too much, or when the situation is pushing them too hard, or when they're out of their depth, that we give them the kind of safe space to recognize that and to tell us that that's happening, and that we have strategies in place then where we can actually take them out and support them. And one of the really important things in acute response is that you should never be the single point of failure. You can always go, and somebody else can always come in and start doing that piece of work. And I think, that to me is a more realistic way of dealing with it than what I sometimes see, which is you can't work more the next time, or work is going to be structured and set up in a certain way. Most people, by the time they reach that stage of working on responses or in wider public health context, they know themselves to some degree. And I think we should support that and let people work in the way that suits them the best.
Thanks. There is, because I think you're right, I think there is that notion of individuals know their best version of themselves, and how do we nurture it, and how do we bring that out? And I guess perhaps maybe, Kevin, in fact, I might throw this to the panel and see what your take is on this, because there is something about the system that we work in is often one where there's limited resource or stretch resources. The system we work in is one that's under, if not constant, it feels like it's under constant change, even if it might not be. How do you motivate teams to show up every day, to put in their shift every day, to feel empowered to want to do something every day? What else? I'm really, this is probably personally for my learning now, but yeah, what are some of the strategies in place to do that on a day-to-day basis?
If I would start and just reflect a little bit, Meera, I think I'm really thinking about your response, because there's a part of me that wants to violently agree with you, but there's also a part of me that says, actually, for the team that I'm working with, what responsibility do I have as a leader to create a space and an environment that allows for that sort of self-regulation, but also says, actually, there's some safety standards here, and I and the organization will take care of you. And the reason why I say that is, as we've emerged from the pandemic, we have a tired workforce. People may not be as engaged, certainly not as empowered with all the systems changes that are going on at the moment. We've seen higher sickness rates. The resilience of our staff and our workforce, I think, very, very different over these past 5 years. And if we were to face another big challenge, I'm not sure that sort of self-regulation capacity that we perhaps relied on 5 years, 6 years ago, we'll necessarily find now. And so to your question, there's something about are our staff feeling valued, right? In this environment where there's so much change, so much uncertainty, so much chaos, how do we create that sense of ownership, value, engagement by our staff? Are we creating rhythms that allow staff to see themselves and their work in the missions of the organization? Are we communicating effectively so that staff feel a sense of control and ownership in all of the changes which are going on? Can you imagine? We've all been through this with an agency closing and finding out in the newspaper on a Sunday morning, through to, over the past 2 weeks, successive days where you hear announcements being made on the changes of another national organization. That is stressful for staff. How do we create spaces for communication and engagement, reflection and understanding of that? And then finally, how do we ensure that our organizations step up to their responsibilities? Employment assistance programs, training and capacity programs, well-being programs for staff, because we have to believe and act as if the staff are our greatest resource. And I think maybe that's where the change starts. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was just kind of reflecting, Yvonne, on your experiences and that kind of picture of how much resilience was needed during COVID-19 and, you know, those different phases you kind of outlined of the sadness and the loneliness. It feels like, you know, finding out about the organisation the night before through the Telegraph article. How, as a leader, do you ever prepare to go in front of, you know, an organisation or your staff or your teams to explain that sort of situation and what's next and how do you move upwards and onwards?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to say is that there is happiness afterwards, right? You've got to believe that. So you must be, if you're a leader, you must be an optimist. I think if you run a business, by the way, I'm just finding that out now, I'm not doing it myself, but I'm seeing it in my family, you must be an optimist. You must believe that you can move to a better place and that you have agency in that. I think what people really felt difficult about, and I see it, I'm now a non-exec, among other things, on a couple of hospital boards in London where, you know, people are not giving the standard of care they want to. And they're worried when they're coming to work. And yes, there is stuff going on with teams and so on, but the biggest issue for them is the moral hazard of what they're dealing with. Now, I felt that very strongly during the pandemic, and I felt it for my colleagues because I knew that they were doing extraordinary stuff. And there was a deafening silence around the demise of that organization. No one said thank you. And that bothered people more, I think, than anything to do with their personal health or, you know, what was happening with their families. It was very worrying and so on. But the fact that they had gone that extra 10,000 miles and no one said thank you. You did a good job. It may not have worked out the way we thought it should. Now, so what's the lesson from that? The lesson is you have to take it on the chin. And you have to move on, and you have to be able to move on and get past that and lean on your friends and your colleagues and your family. I remember walking around a park in South London during about the May time when it was really, really difficult. And I've said this before, so people may have heard it, but I had my son and daughter with me and my husband, and we walked around, and I kind of felt there was something very unpleasant coming our way, but I couldn't put my finger on it. So I said to them, would you be ashamed of me if my name appeared dishonorably in the front page of a newspaper because somebody had associated me with, they'd added up 2 and 2 equals 6. You killed 10,000 people. How would you feel about that? And so the first group I lent into was my own family. And they came back and they said, no, we'd be more proud of you than ever. You've got to have people you can kind of talk to and test your worst fears and work back from that. And then you know this is a very personal thing, then you know you can keep going, painful as it is. And the other group, of course, were the absolutely fabulous people I worked with, the loyalty. On that Sunday morning in the Telegraph, I mean, I was kind of la, you know, it's a Sunday and I'm out taking beer. And somebody said, Yvonne, you better read this quickly. And I rang every one of my colleagues, starting with people in this audience and my colleagues in the regions. And one by one, they all said, we're up for it. We're going to stand by this. We're going to see it through, whatever it is. Now that's priceless. And that's not stuff you can buy. And as Fatai said, that's a vocation. So you've got to mine that kind of generosity and compassion in your teams and your colleagues. And when you're under enormous pressure, people watch your behavior. So that's the difficult bit as a leader. You can't go, when you're feeling like that. You must hold it together and be dignified and feel like you're going to get through it, and you will. But your colleagues are looking at you and they take strength from that. So altogether, I thought it was, and I'm saying it now because perhaps no one has ever said it, thank you to the people who worked in that situation and never had thank you before.
Incredible. I'm just trying to envision that phone call that you've had to make, that, I'm not sure if you said Sunday morning, to colleagues. And earlier on, you made reference to the idea of loyalty and as one of the key values that comes through. And in a way, there's something about how do you build trust to the point where there is that loyalty in there. And it would just be good to get your reflection, Yvonne, and perhaps Meera, if I bring you in after Yvonne as well, just to get a sense of how do you, as a leader across a number of organizations, as a system leader, how do you build that trust given the uncertainty and the chaos that might be around?
So here's a trick. So one of the things you have to be very careful of, and I've made this mistake, is that you don't get into groupthink with your colleagues, and particularly if you're on a board. Because people who like each other so much and don't disagree with each other can very quickly shift off into a bubble that is unreal and make big mistakes. So that's not loyalty. Loyalty is where you can challenge your colleagues and they know that you're doing this and you challenge each other and you take it and you learn. And you may disagree, but that's the trick not to fall into. I don't know what gets loyalty from people, actually. I think it's actually if you are seen as willing to go that mile yourself and you're not expecting people to do what you wouldn't do yourself. Now, this is all very personal because there's systems and partnerships and stuff, but nevertheless, you must have that credibility. And I think at the core of it, and I'm not saying I have it, but compassion and kindness. You must be looking out for your colleagues and your teams so that you care about them. And then I think they'll follow you, up the hill and down again.
Yeah, and it's an important distinction, isn't it, between loyalty that's geared towards the right objective rather than the loyalty that is just to avoid conflict. Because actually, some conflict is helpful in achieving the objective that you have. I don't know, Meera, if you wanted to come in, but I can give you a second to think, because I've got like 1,000 questions flying through my head. So, and I wanted to come to you, Kevin, because one of the things that's been great to see in the audience during the course of the day is not just colleagues from across the 4 nations that are present in this conference, there are also colleagues that are partners with UKHSA in terms of international partners, and I know faculty as a membership organization is a membership organization that also represent international partners. I just wonder in the era that we're in now, where the challenges that we see in public health have no respect for international boundaries, be it emerging infections or climate change or social injustices that we see in some of the conflicts that we see around the world. I just wonder how do we translate this idea of leadership in this context across international boundaries? How does that work?
Which one of us?
I was addressing that, Kevin, but any one of you can take it.
These issues that you've mentioned are global issues, right? I am so mindful that for all of us now, we're probably looking carefully. Well, maybe we're trying not to watch the news too often, because the pace and scale of either bad news or changes within what we understand as I don't want to say the world order. I won't go that far, but the changes that we are used to, that we have seen over the past few months, and the pace at which they're occurring means that it's important for us as leaders to try to make sense of this. It's important for us to be consistently horizon scanning and understanding what are the implications of those changes for the work that we're doing. It's important to say and to have and to create spaces where we can process those changes with our teams so that they're better prepared to respond or better prepared to be resilient for whatever impacts may be having. So I'm doing, for example, a lot of sense making at this time to say actually the changes which are happening globally, which are happening nationally, what might it mean for our work and how we do our business in London. It means that we also need to strengthen our partnerships as well, so whether globally or domestically. So to be more resilient as an organization, we're reaching out. Because the challenge that we have is that in these difficult times that we involute, we think we have to, put the hatches up and focus internally. So there's something as well about how do we are more intentional with our partnerships as we try to make sense of what's happening globally as well. So I hope that answers, the sort of dynamic sense-making, partnering, brokering that we have. And the final thing that we do is holding, because sometimes we don't have answers, because things are unfolding almost in real time. So rather than trying to guess what the outcome is, actually just holding that space and allowing time to see how things unfold can be a very effective tool to help teams to manage what's going on as well.
Yeah, and I can imagine in that settings, it can feel very vulnerable to say, actually, we just don't know yet, but there is something really powerful in saying, we just don't know yet. Let's hold that space and see. Thanks, Kevin. I don't know, you wanted to come in on that.
Just that point about the dynamic nature of leadership needed at the moment. And I know with instant response, the thing that I've always wondered as someone with a kind of interest in health protection is, does instant response and the kind of speed and robustness that's needed, does instant response attract certain traits of a leader? Or is it the other way around? Is it instant response brings out certain traits in a leader?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think there are certain types of people that find instant response easier. Instant response is, I don't actually want to say it's a clear way of operating. It isn't necessarily. There can be a lot of uncertainty and there can be a lot of challenge, but it's a very structured way of operating, and that naturally appeals to some people more than others. And I think you do see that. You see people who lean into that and they want to work more in that environment. But I think, and personally I think it's true of myself, that most people do have a kind of peacetime mode and an instant mode, and they're different, and that's right, they should be different, because you need different things when you're doing acute responses from what you need to support and grow and encourage a team to be really successful outside a response, which is a different kind of set of skills and attributes. And I think the important thing is to recognize when you need to flip. Flipping in is really easy. You've got a big fat challenge in front of you and you've got to go at it, and maybe you've got a very short time to do it. Most people go in. I find coming out really difficult. So coming back from, and particularly, obviously COVID was a long response. Mpox was a really long response as well. And 2022, if people remember it in the audience, was pretty much a year when there was nothing but response in many parts of the organization. And at the end of that, trying to remember what your peacetime self is like is actually quite hard. So I think you have to really consciously get out of instant mode, figure out what's good and what's helpful, get out of the command and controlled mindset, get out of the everything has to happen in 20 minutes sort of feeling, and go back to your longer term, more supportive, more collegiate, kind of approach.
Yeah.
But it's not straightforward.
So I guess being the leader you need to be for particular sort of situations. I guess I found, Yvonne, your point around understanding the self, yourself when it comes to leadership and how important that is. I guess when it comes to developing authenticity as a leader, I wonder what your journey has been like over your career so far when it comes to developing an authentic leadership style where you can feel comfortable to kind of bring your whole self to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it may sound like I'm sort of some sort of saint when I'm saying this, but it's not the case at all. I mean, I've made masses of mistakes, and some of them I'm very embarrassed about. So, I think that at the core of authenticity is values. You need to understand what your values are and, what you're willing to trade. And again, like when to stop on, just keep going. When to stop on your values, when it actually, you're not willing to trade that for the whatever it is that, people so aspire to. But, does it matter? You can walk away from this because what you've got and what you hold is more important. And for me, that's everything. Everything. I mean, titles, you can have them all, but values, if I had felt that I'd let myself down on what mattered to me, I would be disappointed at this stage. And actually, I'm very happy being a nobody, but just knowing who I am, and I'm comfortable with that, and I'm happy to share it with anybody who wants it. Really, that's it. That's for me. That's what authenticity is.
So coming back to those values, Kevin, I'm really interested in your kind of opinion on this. I know leadership is like your mastermind subject, but what's been your kind of journey when it comes to that authentic leadership style? I know you like to learn a new leadership theory or something new every year, as you said on our previous episode. What's your kind of journey been like with authenticity?
So I value leadership as a craft, right? So in the same way that we can learn to be great incident directors, we can learn to be great statisticians, we can learn to be great leaders as well, but it does take time and investment and a commitment to learning and developing that craft. I agree with Yvonne that I think at its core, authenticity and authentic leadership is about knowing self, understanding values, understanding the alignment of those values with the organization and the systems that you're working in, and creating that space for that alignment to take place. I also have a different view on authentic leadership as well. I suspect as I've gotten older, much more confident in myself, that this is just a function of aging now, that I think actually I'm getting old, I'm getting more bold, I know what I know, and I'm confident. And maybe that's also allowing me to be more authentic in the workplace, because what you see is what you get. Would my 26-year-old self have that confidence? Maybe not. I've worked in organizations where I haven't felt psychologically safe to be my full self. Would I encourage people to come out in organizations that are not empowering, that don't have a focus on bringing your full self to work, right? So there's also that interaction with the environment you're operating in. So while I think we should be encouraging everybody to be their full self, remember that there are other factors in play as well. But at its core, I think it's about values and spending time to understand who you are, why you're here, and what you're meant to achieve.
That's a really helpful reminder, and Yvonne, you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I don't want to lose the point about aging, okay, because this is now where I am. But I'm also, I'm thrilled that it's been taken seriously across Europe, and we are an aging continent. And I just wanted to say to people about being old and having that leadership for being old and being content in being old. There is a good life after full-time work, and there is a good life in being old so long as you can keep your health in good shape. That is the most important thing for me. It's more important than anything else. Health first and family alongside it. And other things happen, but aging is good. It is good, but you need to invest in it.
It's a really good point, isn't it? And I know there are questions that's flying through on the app, and hopefully we'll be able to get to a few of them. Because I think it's a really helpful reminder, because we hear about authentic leadership a lot, and I think that also comes with the expectation to be the leader that others want you to be, and the challenge of just recognizing that authenticity comes with time and comes with safe space and comes with just being able to get there, aging, and being able to acknowledge the wisdom and the braveness that comes with that. The challenge that I think I have, or that I think we have, is we often have leaders who are technically brilliant are now in leadership position. And you talk about leadership being a craft. How do we, I guess, and again, it could be anyone, but Meera, I can start with you on this one. So sorry, the look on your face.
Where this is going to go, so yeah.
I just wonder, how do we, because you're a really good example in that you've transitioned from that technical role into a leadership role. What do we need to put in place to allow that leadership as a craft that Kevin described to support that transition?
I think that's tricky because, well, it's tricky from my personal experience because it happened through the series of events that happened around the time that I was making that transition, which we very much hope won't be a replicated series of events. But I think there's a few things. One is I think the most influential thing in making some of those transitions has been mentorship. And I'm not sure that we have a strong enough role and a sort of strong enough system around leadership, mentorship. How do we take people to the next stage? And I don't think you need the same mentors at all those different stages. So how do we work out what you need at that time and find that person for you? And I think that's really important. And now it's been particularly relevant to me recently, actually, because we've had a new swathe of medical consultants that have joined the organisation, many of them from technical backgrounds, interested in public health because of the pandemic and thinking that that could be a place that they could contribute. But they need to sort of make that transition. And I think the mentorship is the thing that's making the difference to them. So I think that's really important. The other thing is about the sort of safe space to try things out. It's quite difficult, but I think we need to think about the ways in which people can step up in a safer environment first before they step up in a highly scrutinized environment. So finding, the first instance or the first cross-system pieces that you can do supported and making sure that we don't just hand those back to the same people, but actually new people come and try them.
Yeah, really, really, really good point, isn't it, around the idea of mentorship. I guess shoulders to stand on and see what it looks like. People that have walked the walk that you can sort of learn from and build on from that perspective. And I guess in terms of sort of final question from me, I guess, just looking at the time, in terms of key advice that you might be able to give to sort of emerging leaders or leaders making that transition, Kevin, what would be your one key advice that you will give to the generation of leaders that's coming through?
Yeah. You've heard me say this before. Leadership is a privilege. Leadership is a privilege. Not many people get an opportunity to lead organizations, teams, to create a vision, to support people to achieve that vision, to leave a legacy behind where you've created a force for good and therefore impact. So embrace that privilege, approach it with humility, and approach it doing the best that you can, because it's such an amazing opportunity. But run towards it. I know too many people who run away from leadership. And I'd like to encourage all of you here to find those opportunities to build that craft, understand the privilege, run towards it as well. It is so rewarding and certainly a key part of my own career as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm probably one of those people that run the other direction. But yeah, there's something about taking that challenge. Have we got questions that's come through?
Yeah, we've got 5 minutes left for questions. If anyone in the room has a question, please put your hand up and someone will give a mic around.
Just in that corner there.
Alex, has someone got a mic around? No, we've got to get you on the podcast then.
Should we take a question while we arrange a mic?
There's a mic coming, I think. It's Alex just over there. If you could introduce yourself as well, that'd be great.
Hi, Alex Bhattacharya here. Thank you for that. You guys have given us some really insightful things, and I really like what you were saying at the end around the values. And so my question is kind of around that. So when you have your strong set of values, and as a leader, you kind of understand where you are, where you're coming from, where you want to get to, but how do you deal with the challenge when the values or the culture around you don't quite align? So how do you kind of push towards that positive change and that positive influence when you have that as a bit of a block, perhaps?
Kevin?
All right. Thanks, guys. So thank you for that question. It happens all the time. But the key thing about knowing your values, and Yvonne, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that you can approach that conflict with intentionality. The problem that I've seen when I've mentored people is that if you're not sure of what your values are, you're often in situations where you feel, I'm not successful, I'm not moving on, I'm frustrated, I'm tired, I'm not enjoying the space that I'm in. And when you explore in that leadership mentoring relationship, you realize that people are mismatched. So when you understand your values, you become more intentional in saying, actually, I'm in a situation where there's conflict, and therefore I can make different choices. The choices may be to go, it may be to stay, but then to put protective things in place so you can manage a situation, or to gently extract yourself from whichever circumstance that you may be in. But it requires you to understand those values, and then you can begin to think about where is the dissonance, and then what am I going to do about that dissonance? So I hope that helps. All of us, I think, have been in situations where we were maybe working with administrations which really are going in the wrong direction, or we think, or which are not supportive of public health practice. I've worked with US administrations where, as an HIV lead, I was only allowed to speak about abstinence until marriage, for example, as a key strategy for responding to an HIV pandemic. So, you've been in those circumstances, but you learn how to navigate that. So, hope that helps.
Yvonne, did you want to reflect anything on that?
I think that's exactly what I would say, and it depends on where you are in your organisation. If you're at a board level, that's a very different situation where you can influence much more about culture. By the way, we're trying to do this in the hospital I'm in at the moment, and it's incredibly difficult to change a culture. It really is if it's established. I'm just warning you. So this is a long haul, and you need to know the technique of how to do that rather than just have a go. But if you're, in the depths of the organization, I think first, as Kevin says, need to know yourself and find like minds, because that will sustain you as well. And there will be people who will share your values, and that will keep you going until such time as you get into a position where you can influence and perhaps change things.
Excellent. Are there any more questions in the room? If not, we'll go to online. There's one probably for Meera to answer around resilience, around how can an organisation help sustain individual resilience over time?
I think I may come back to my answer that Kevin slightly disagrees with, which is that I don't think I think resilience is something very individual, and I think the best thing that we can do, and it's not a particularly easy thing to do, is help people to understand their own resilience. What does burnout look like for you? What does it look like for you when you've been working too much? What things stress you out a lot? That's not going to be the same as the next person, and that's why I'm always a little bit hesitant about kind of very blanket policies about this stuff. I think it is quite individualized. Having said that, I completely agree there need to be some sort of safeguards in place, but I think that the most that we can do is to think about people as individuals and help them to learn about their personal resilience and what can enhance it and what challenges it. Yep. And try not to do that when you're doing an instant response, which is not the right time, but optimally between. Yeah.
In the interest of time, we'll leave it there, but it's a tradition on the podcast to end with a career tip. A lot of our kind of listeners are kind of pursuing a career in public health. So I'll go to kind of each of you to share a very short career tip for those pursuing a career in public health. Perhaps I'll go to Yvonne first.
Well, I had a lovely birthday card from my mother years ago, and I never realized how relevant it is to leadership. And it said, know yourself and you will be false to no person. And that, I think, is it. Invest and know yourself.
Meera?
Mine is a bit less profound than Yvonne's, because mine is look for the next thing that you are genuinely interested in doing. And that's pretty much what I've done all my life, and it seems to have led me okay so far. So I'm going to go for that.
I like that. Kevin?
Follow your passion and joy, because the work is long, the work is hard. So operate from a space of joy and find the opportunities to bring that into your work. And that will, I think, sustain you for the journey as well. Yeah.
I feel like we can wrap that up into a card, isn't it? There's something about following your passion, knowing your next step, and know yourself in terms of your journey. It's been fascinating. I feel like we can carry this on for hours, but I know people, we can't, so we will stop here. Thank you for the time, for sharing your insights and just letting us get a glimpse into your leadership journeys up to where you are now. There's been a lot that we've picked up on this. I know certainly I have things around system leadership and how you work across organizational boundaries, how you build trust, how you build loyalty that's not blind loyalty. How do you do that? And how do you recognize individualities in this journey, in the application of authentic leadership? So it's tons and tons of tips and lessons, and it's been fantastic. Just for colleagues and delegates online and in person, just a reminder that a number of this type of conversation are available on the podcast. There's a QR code up on there, so please do go and check it out. Just wanted to say thank you for staying, because it is 7 p.m. and a lot of you thinking, oof, we've been up for really long. Really appreciate that you stayed in, and I hope you found that as valuable as I know I have, and certainly we have. But again, just to say thank you, and a round of applause, please, for our panelists.